Quote, "When you're young, your whole life is about the pursuit of fun. Then you grow up and you learn to be cautious. You could break a bone or a heart. You look before you leap, and sometimes you don't leap at all because there isn't always somewhere there to catch you. And in life, there's no safety net. When did it stop being fun and start being scary?" From The Sex and the City. It is both a blessing and a curse that I experienced my quarter-life crisis slightly earlier than the norm. I was still a junior in college. I saw the real world coming, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was peering over the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way to get to the bottom was to jump, and probably, in true Warner Brothers style, crash into roughly 1,000,000 rocks and sticks along the way. And it would hurt. I knew that. Some part of me also knew, though, that it would be worth it in the end. Not to mention that I had no say in the matter anyway. Where else was I supposed to go, exactly? Back to high school and my parents? I think not. Too much petty drama and bad pop music there. So I freaked out and dropped out of college. I ran at full speed. I wasn't entirely sure in what direction that I was running. In fact, I had no clue whatsoever, except that it was neither in the direction of high school nor college. But eventually that direction became my life and self. There were no fireworks like I was expecting. There was no sign that said, "Congratulations, you have reached your destination. Welcome to adulthood." Although, wouldn't that be nice? Like a GPS. 10 miles to your destination. Turn left. 5 miles. Ding ding, you have arrived. But no, it just sort of happened. Slowly and without me really noticing. I just woke up one day and didn't feel lost anymore. November 2007, Bennington College, Bennington, Vermont. The leaves have turned various shades of purple, red, and brown, and swirl around chaotically in the wind. The social atmosphere at this small liberal arts college in rural Vermont mimics the leaves. Midterm projects are due shortly, and students chaotically run around trying to finish that which many of us have put off until the last minutes. The air buzzes with a mixture of panic and enthusiasm. Midterms are stressful, as are finals, as is being in college in general, especially a college where you're expected to design your own major and many of your own projects, and have some idea of what you want to do with your life at ages 18 to 22. And yet, it is also incredibly fulfilling. I am no different than the others. I have, in fact, put off the bulk of my projects to the last minute. As the deadlines loom, I wonder how on earth it will be possible to finish on time. Barring some miracle or magic, it would seem that the only choice I have is to pull an all-nighter. But I have done this before, and I know exactly what to do. I pack my books, laptop, class notes, and an assortment of junk food and soda into my backpack. I head to the classroom building where I usually do all-nighters, since my roommate is asleep, and I can't concentrate in the messy dorm room common space that I associate with fun times with my friends, not with work. Being a hippie college, they don't believe in locking buildings overnight. I know I probably won't be alone. There will be other students there, and perhaps also one of Bennington's history professors who frequently stays in her office overnight grading papers. She was surprised to see me the first time, but she's come to expect my company. And now she even provides coffee and 4 a.m. philosophical discussion to give us both a break from our work. Here in Vermont, fall and winter blend together. Although the colorful leaves still adorn most of the trees, the chill in the wind can be painful to my face, the only part of my body that is still exposed. I don't mind, though. I am too distracted by my thoughts of my upcoming projects and life in general. In liberal arts school, we are encouraged not only to get jobs after we graduate, but also to change the world. Here, now, with adrenaline pumping through my body as I prepare to finish my projects, I feel like that just might be possible. I feel like I was brought into this world to serve a purpose, one that nobody but me can serve. I throw my backpack onto my back and begin to run. Many times before, I have run into the Vermont mountains to escape my problems, faster and faster until everything disappears. But this time I am running in joy, in hope, in the sense that anything is possible. I crave feeling grounded and connected to nature. I am a pagan, which is a nature-based spirituality that I've been practicing since the age of 7. I do not believe that divinity created nature, like many other religions believe, but instead I believe that nature itself is divine. So I take off my shoes and dig my toes into the grass and dirt as I continue to run. And then it begins to snow. There was a time when I flew higher. There was a time the wild girl running free would be me. I miss the mountains. I miss the highs and lows. All the climbing, all the falling, all the while the wide wind blows, stinging you with snow and soaking you with rain. I miss the mountains. I miss the pain. The following year, I would describe this scene to my psychotherapist of the time. My dropping out of college and seeking intensive mental health treatment had made her think that there was more going on than my initial diagnosis of depression and ADHD, which I had acquired at age 14. I didn't think much of that at the time. Aren't all 14-year-olds depressed and scatterbrained? Isn't that what adolescence is supposed to be like? She framed this experience of running barefoot through the snow and feeling like anything was possible as my first hypomanic episode, and told me that I had bipolar too. I wasn't sure how I felt about this, about labeling my happiness as some kind of symptom of mental illness, so I kept quiet, and I didn't tell her I had also skipped my medications that night so that I would be able to stay up all night and do homework, as many of the medications had sedating effects. I was in denial. I fit the criteria of bipolar 2 far better than I had fit the criteria of unipolar depression and ADHD. Hypomanic episodes can mimic ADHD, so many people with bipolar 2 are initially misdiagnosed, especially if they begin to seek professional help at a young age, when doctors are hesitant to give a label of a severe mental illness. But I didn't want to acknowledge this. I didn't want to acknowledge it not because I had any problems with bipolar or people who are bipolar, but because bipolar disorder is on a long list of conditions that automatically disqualifies you from joining the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps had been my dream ever since that November in Bennington, when I felt like I wanted to change the world. No, when I felt like I must change the world. I suppose crazy people aren't supposed to change the world. I would have to find another way. Summer 2009, Boston, Massachusetts. True Colors Out Youth Theater Alumni Picnic. Evelyn, Director of True Colors Out Youth Theater. Hi, Nikki. Nice to see you. Have you met James? Nikki. No, I haven't. Hi, nice to meet you, James. I'm Nikki. James. Hello, Nikki. Nice to meet you, too. I'm from the True Colors class of 2002. Nikki. Let's see. 2002. I was a sophomore in high school back then. Evelyn. You could have been in True Colors. Nikki. Well, yes, except that I was in Rhode Island, and I wasn't out of the closet yet. Evelyn. Well, we could fix that. We would have shoved you right out of that closet. Nikki. Well, I didn't even know yet. I didn't even know homosexuality existed. You see, Rhode Island is stuck in the 40s. Seriously, nobody was out at my high school. Not one person. Evelyn. Well, we could have fixed that too. Nikki. I mean, I'm sure there were gay people there, but... Evelyn. Yes, because gay people are everywhere. We're taking over the world. You know, I can relate. Nobody was out in my high school either. Nikki. Yes, but you're old. James cracks up. Evelyn frowns and fake whispers. James. Come on, old lady. The girl's got a point. Evelyn. And how old are you again, Nikki? Nikki. I'm 24. Evelyn. Excuse me, who are you calling old? You're pretty old yourself. Nikki. What? But you're 10 years older than me. Evelyn, so? That doesn't mean you're not old. Nikki, humph. From the ages of 21 to 23, I was in a theater troupe that changed my life forever, and quite possibly even saved it. It was a troupe for LGBTQ youth, and it focused on political and activist theater, with the goal of advocating for LGBTQ rights to high schools and social service agencies. It started with a boot camp of training: guerrilla theater, costume and prop design, playwriting, and activism and public speaking. But to say it was all about training doesn't do it justice. We also did a lot of talking, bonding, and processing. We talked and wrote about what being LGBTQ youth meant to us. We talked and wrote about what kind of world we wanted to see and how we might accomplish that. We talked and wrote about all sorts of things. Things like addiction, poverty and homelessness, suicidality, homophobia and transphobia, gender and sexuality exploration, gender and sexuality theory, intersectionality, kyriarchy, bigotry, social justice, the history of youth activist movements in the United States, our hopes and dreams for the future, and what kind of artists and activists we wanted to be. We did improv theater around these discussions, which was videotaped and transcribed, and somehow the transcriptions and the journals and the weeks of laughter and tears came together to produce our original plays. Some of the places we toured to, we were warned, had high incidences of homophobia and transphobia. But the audiences were still largely made up of vulnerable youth, much like ourselves. Especially in the question and answer section and open discussions that followed each performance, all of us, both the people in the audience and the people on the stage, were able to recognize our shared humanity, perhaps for the first time. For my part, I was able to combat some preconceived notions around race and class, and begin to unpack my privileges as a white girl from a middle-class family. How we then chose to react to this, of course, was up to us, and it's unrealistic to think that a few hours can completely undo a lifetime of messaging and experiences. Yet for some of us, it opened a door to consider that people unlike ourselves in one way or another are still people, deserving of respect, and who often have more in common with us than we might think, if we only looked beyond the surface. I never felt so empowered in my life. And although it's been a long time since then, and I could definitely use a brush up, I can say with certainty that without that experience, I might not have ever become an activist. I probably would have continued to blame myself for every bad thing that ever happened to me and feel horribly insecure all the time as a result. It probably never would have truly sunk in the extent to which my trauma, my insecurities, my neuroses, are not only resulting from a chemical imbalance in the brain or poor choices, but rather from a complex interaction between my brain and personal choices and the society in which I live. A society in which people such as LGBTQ people, people of color, poor people, women, the young and the old, disabled people, people with brains or bodies that are different from the norm, and people of cultural or subcultural or religious minorities are still treated as less than human. A society in which anyone who is different from oneself in any way might be looked at as less than human. Now contrast this to my experience in therapy. Sure, it sometimes helps, though often only as long as I stay actively involved. And at what cost? Rather than being empowered, therapy is often disempowering. By its very nature, the therapist is placed in a position of authority over your life and health, which can make it difficult for clients to feel like their accomplishments are their own. If clients show any difficulty coping with the realities of living in a cruel and harsh world, they are called mentally ill, regardless of if they feel this description fits them. Their difficulties are blamed on their brain chemicals, or perhaps traumatic experiences are recognized and validated, but it's still then the client's responsibility to change themselves and their reactions rather than changing the external situation. No matter what happens, life will always have ups and downs, so the capacity for resilience is still important. But regardless of how big of a difference someone ultimately makes, what really matters is that they feel they can. Even if we're not talking about societal injustices, but about a personal goal, like, say, giving a driving license. If someone doesn't have that basic belief in their capacity to achieve it, regardless of how much time and effort it might take, they probably won't achieve that goal. No amount of coping skills or processing your trauma or medication will change that. And if someone's suffering is truly due to oppression, and not just their brain chemicals, as is so often the case, if nothing is done to address these systemic oppression systems, then no amount of coping skills or processing or medication will truly help them. This is the sad truth about living in an unjust world. But there's still hope. It doesn't have to be this way. I do have hope that society as a whole can and will change as it has in the past. But no matter what happens, and even if the pace of change is so slow that people working for change today never even get to see the results of their work, this doesn't negate their power. If a suffering person believes that they can and must use their suffering to change the world, so that others don't have to suffer in the ways that they did, they can do almost anything. Then they just have to remember that whatever help they got along the way to gain these skills, it was still them who decided to take action, and that is a major accomplishment. Quote, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, courage is the quiet voice saying at the end of the day, 'I will try again tomorrow.'" Quote from Marianne Radmacher. December 2008, Boston, Massachusetts. Nikki, I had a job interview today. Sasha, Nikki's then roommate. Oh, cool. How was it? Where was it? Nikki, oh, it was good. It was at Journey Child Care Center. Sasha, oh, that's an interesting name. Are they religious or something? Nikki, no, they're just journeying down the path of life. Sasha, is that a Nikki interpretation or theirs? Nikki, it's mine. Anyway, no, they're not religious. They're Russian. Sasha, oh, everyone there is Russian? Nikki, well, the director is, and a lot of the children are. It serves primarily a Russian community, apparently. Sasha, oh, huh. Nikki, I didn't find that out until I got there. Actually, I didn't find out what the company was until I got there either. When the lady called me and told me she had received my cover letter and resume and wanted to interview me, her accent was so thick I couldn't understand half of what she was saying. I got that she wanted to interview me and the date and time and address, but I just couldn't understand the company name even after I asked her to repeat it. And Google couldn't figure it out either. So I figured I would just go and find out when I got there. I plugged the address into my GPS, and then when I got there, I was like, oh, Journey Child Care Center. This seems like a place I would apply to. I must be in the right place. Sasha laughs. Wait, are you implying that all Russians are atheist? Nikki, wait, what? Sasha, but you said... Nikki, oh, right. No, I was just trying to tell you everything I could about the company, and for some reason my brain decided the next logical step after saying they don't have a religious affiliation was to say they're Russian. Sasha, oh, well, of course you did. So have you decided yet, are you a vampire or a were-leopard in the role-playing game? We still don't know who Rachel is. Rachel, another roommate who just walked into the room, pouts and makes sad puppy dog eyes. Nikki walks over and hugs Rachel. Oh, we were just talking about... Sasha sarcastically, no, we don't know who you are. What are you doing here in our apartment? Get out. That bedroom on the right side of the hallway, that's our cats, you know. I did end up getting that job at Journey Child Care Center, the Russian non-religious daycare center. At first, I was wildly enthusiastic. This was my first real job. Although I had worked at a summer camp in high school, I was still living with my parents at the time, and so I wasn't surviving off of what I earned there. The LGBTQ theater only paid a monthly stipend, and so I could not survive off of that job either. I felt like reaching this milestone, confusedly filling out a W-2 form for the first time, made me finally a real adult at the age of 22. I also was well aware that in 2009, the economy was crashing, and so it was very difficult for pretty much anyone to find a job, even one that they were very qualified for. This made me all the more proud of my accomplishment. Although, as I began actually working in classrooms as an assistant who floated between the various infant and toddler classrooms, depending on where I was needed at the time, my experience proved to be drastically different from the small progressive preschools I was accustomed to from college practicums, and not in a positive way. It seemed to be constant chaos. There were too few teachers and way too many children. Teachers were constantly quitting and being replaced. When the infants and toddlers didn't behave as the teachers wanted them to, the teachers yelled and sometimes swore at them and used bizarre punishments. I felt morally uncomfortable with a lot of what was going on, but as a newly hired assistant, I also felt that there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it, and I was still questioning my own abilities and learning how to best work with children. I felt completely trapped and helpless. Nobody would listen to what I, an assistant fresh out of college, had to say. It was my job to go along with what my supervisors had in mind, whether I agreed with it or not, right? July 2009. My boss at the daycare center has informed me that they have a lot of new babies starting in September, so they can give me my regular hours back. In the past month, since I've been working only as an on-call substitute, I've been happier than I have been in a long time. In that time, I have realized how incredibly unhappy the daycare center made me, which was hard to see when I was in the midst of it and had no time or space to reflect or basis for comparison. My confidence has significantly increased because I haven't had to deal on a regular basis with having every tiny little mistake I have put under a spotlight while my achievements go completely unnoticed. I've begun to think of myself again as someone who is talented in human services and education and who has what it takes to have a successful future in these areas. I'm balancing all these feelings with the practical issues of, oh shit, the job market sucks, I need money to survive, and I'm running out of savings, and I still don't even have a college degree. Will I even be able to find another job? On the plus side, my paperwork from the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care came in today. I am now officially EEC certified as an infant, toddler, and preschool teacher. Perhaps this will make up for my lack of college degree and my marketability and likelihood of finding another job. At this point, I think I'd rather do something completely irrelevant to my college experience or goals for the future, like working at Starbucks or Walmart or something, than continue working here. At least then, if I still regularly feel like I'm in high school all over again, I couldn't place so much weight on it. I could have the attitude of, oh, it's just a job, it's not a career, so it doesn't really matter. There's also always nannying. So, I should be okay, right? After I took a week off for Christmas and New Year's Eve, and my hours at the daycare center were reduced from regular weekly hours to on-call due to a decrease in babies at the center, I was able to get some much-needed distance and perspective from the situation. Being there every day, it had started to feel normal to me, even though in retrospect I am able to recognize that it definitely wasn't. I finally was able to put my foot down, acknowledge the discomfort I had felt from the very beginning, and speak to the director of the infant wing about my concerns. Thankfully, this led to an observation period for infant teachers, certain infant teachers receiving additional training as the director felt was necessary, and other teachers being laid off. This did have some positive effects on the culture and practices of the center, but ultimately I felt that there was nothing more I could do, and I was still unhappy there. At that point, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. Overall, my experience at Journey Childcare was traumatic. It was hard to know that something was very wrong, but to feel so powerless to change it, and be forced to continue to watch it day after day. My mental health did suffer as a result, and I needed to take a break from doing childcare work overall, even though I previously thought of this field as my calling. If I can say that anything positive came out of this experience, it's that I learned, perhaps for the first time, that just because someone is in a position of authority over you does not mean that they are necessarily right. In certain circumstances, it is okay and even preferable to trust your instincts instead of just blindly doing what an authority figure tells you to do. Being a former goody two-shoes, this is one of the first times I can ever recall standing up to an authority figure, and that was terrifying. In the end, though, it was the right thing to do. After I quit my job at Journey Childcare, I briefly attempted to return to college to finish my bachelor's degree. I started school with renewed enthusiasm and motivation, since I had now seen firsthand why knowledge of children and child development is so important if you want to work with children. However, I was still struggling emotionally with the lingering effects of that traumatic experience and found it extremely difficult to focus on my studies. January 2011, Providence, Rhode Island. Fluorescent lights shine down upon me, and I am surrounded by noise. A girl about my age sits crying in a corner, wearing pajamas and pigtailed braids. I am torn with feeling like I should go over and comfort her, tell her everything will be okay, and feeling like I can empathize with her so much that I am overwhelmed and wanting to run away from her and hide from this reminder of my own desperation. Also, in all honesty, I don't know for sure that everything will be okay, either for her or for me. I don't want to lie to her. A nurse in blue scrubs walks by with a clipboard. "Checks," she says, then jots some things down on a piece of paper. As I soon learn, this will happen every 15 minutes. Privacy is a luxury of the outside world. "Excuse me?" I ask, trying to get her attention, but she continues to walk away in a frenzy to check on everyone in her caseload. "Excuse me?" I repeat, and finally she turns to look at me, appearing annoyed by my interruption. "Can I please have my colored pencils?" I ask. "One moment," she replies, and takes a key out of her pocket. She uses it to unlock a small cubby with my name on it. My legal name, not the one I prefer to be called by. Inside are all the things I am not allowed to have unless under staff supervision. Colored pencils, which could be used to injure oneself or others. Shaving razor, same. Hairspray, which could be ingested. Watercolor paints, could also be ingested, or could be thrown at the walls. I am struck with the similarities between this place and Journey Childcare. In fact, being haunted by memories of that experience is part of how I ended up here, in a short-term acute psychiatric ward. The cubbies. The children at the daycare also had cubbies. They had to ask us permission to access their belongings too. They followed a schedule like we do here, all eating lunch and going on walks together at the same time. We rewarded them for good behavior and punished them for bad. Here, only those patients with privileges who have been successfully following their treatment plan are allowed to go for walks outside on the grounds in groups with the staff supervisor. All of this worked for preschool children, but we are adults. In this place, though, in this alternate universe, that is questionable. Words are important. Naming things, finding the right name, gives them power. Conversely, a misplaced word or name can just as easily take that power away. I like the word mad. I like how it rolls off my tongue. Mad. When I admit to being mad, I'm admitting to being crazy, which is accurate, but I'm also admitting to being weird and outside the mainstream. "We're all mad here," said the Cheshire Cat, when what he really meant to say was, "All of us are freaks, and if you weren't also a freak, you wouldn't be here." I love letting my freak flag fly, which is why I love being mad. Reveling in madness is, in its own way, a small act of rebellion. Despite all this, though, I don't shy away from saying that I am mentally ill or that I have a mental illness, which is also accurate. The way I see it, mental health is very real, and wherever there exists a spectrum of health, illness can exist too. Physical and mental health are in some ways similar, despite being drastically different in other ways, but that's a topic for another day. Illness or injury, a broken brain, can result from an accident, a traumatic event. You can also catch an illness. Sometimes your environment just conspires against your well-being. Some people are more prone to illness than others or take longer to recover than others. And some people were born with illnesses that they will have their whole lives. Some people get so ill and perhaps don't have access to resources that could help them get better that they end up dying from it. This is very sad, no matter if the cause is physical or mental or some combination, because it's often preventable, but it isn't always prevented. And yet, everyone can get ill, and everyone does, which is not something most people want to think about because it's scary. And so it becomes the mythological territory of us outliers, the disabled, the mad, the neurodivergent. They will not let us have our moments or years of health, no matter how prevalent they may actually be. Just because someone is currently experiencing or even especially prone to challenge or instability doesn't mean they always will be, especially with the right support system and an opportunity for a fulfilling and meaningful life. But if that is acknowledged, it must also be acknowledged that the lines that divide the healthy from the sick and the sane from the insane are not as black and white as they seem. With that comes the realization that even if you're healthy now, you probably will not be healthy forever, either physically or mentally, which is something that most people just aren't ready to accept. Quote, people ask, how did you get in the mental hospital? What they really want to know is if they are likely to end up there as well. I can't answer the real question. All I can tell them is, it's easy. And it is easy to slip into a parallel universe. There are so many of them. Worlds of the insane, the criminal, the crippled, the dying, perhaps of the dead as well. These worlds exist alongside this world and resemble it, but they are not in it. Another feature of a parallel universe is that although it is invisible from this side, once you are in it, you can easily see the world that you came from. Sometimes the world looks huge and menacing, quivering like a vast pile of jelly. Other times it is miniaturized and alluring, a spin and shining in its orbit. Either way, it can't be discounted. Every window on Alcatraz has a view of San Francisco. Quote from Girl Interrupted, written by Susanna Kazin. Lines in the sand are meant to wash away. February 2011, Boston, Massachusetts. I had a ceremonial removal of my hospital bracelet today. I have been wearing it as a reminder of where I've come from and what I'm up against, to make sure I continue to take care of myself even when I start to feel better, because one is never cured or whole. We keep learning and growing for our entire lives. But it started to really bother me today. It was a trigger, to say the very least. There was one point at which my left wrist began to itch and burn and tingle, almost like a sunburn. I ripped that bracelet off, breaking it at the center, and threw it across the room, with force. I rarely do anything with force. They say the point at which treatment begins to be a bother is the point at which it is no longer necessitated in its present form. I'm not going to be so ignorant as to say that I'm completely finished, because again, will I ever be, really? But what I do think I can move on from is the hospital. I'm officially no longer in an acute state of mental instability, the level which necessitates hospital stays in the first place. And that is huge. Day after day, give me clouds and rain and gray. Give me pain if that's what's real. It's the price we pay to feel. The price of love is loss. but still we pay. We love anyway, and you find some way to survive. You find out you don't have to be happy at all to be happier alive. I knew I still needed to do something to address my ongoing mental health difficulties, but I wasn't sure exactly what to do. In the end, I decided that I needed an escape and a change of pace, to do something that felt to be the opposite of the urban corporate environment that traumatized me. I moved to rural North Carolina to volunteer on a farm. Take this chance and we'll make a new start somewhere far from what keeps us apart. And I swear that somewhere in the night there's a light in the dark. November 2011, rural North Carolina. Samhain was this past Monday. Samhain is the pagan celebration and honoring of the fall equinox and harvest season. Like Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead in Spain, Samhain is also a time to honor loved ones who have passed away. As they transition to whatever is next for their souls, we also spend some time in reflection on transitions in our own lives. We cherish and celebrate what has come before, and the influence it, whether a person, an animal, a place, an event, or a stage of life, has had in our lives. Then we find a way to let it go and greet the next adventure. This year, Samhain arrives with oddly appropriate timing. I am going through many transitions in my life at this time. The most obvious may be that I am preparing to move back to Boston, which contains with it many miniature changes and transitions. My role with the animals on the farm is also evolving. The dogs seem to have learned and grown a lot from my training, which is wonderful, though at the same time I am struggling with this feeling that perhaps there is not much left for me to teach them. This is something that I've experienced many times before as a child care provider, too many times to count in fact, and yet it never gets any easier. This past spring, for instance, while doing shopping in Faneuil Hall, I encountered a mother holding a child's hand. I did not recognize the child at first, though I did recognize the mother, and so we greeted. I discovered that this child of school age was a child that I had babysat years prior. At the time that I babysat her, she was a baby, and I had seen her take her first steps and heard her speak her first words, which were not mama or dada, but cookie. What happens when children grow up? Well, they go to school and make friends. They learn to tie their shoes and run and count, and eventually to don't go on dates and do calculus. They transition, as it were. For them, there is always something new to learn, and for me, there is always something new to teach, but to a different child. This is exciting and never bores me, but again, it also never gets any easier. As I talk about the children in my life, I recall when I was a child myself. One of the ways my best friend and I entertained ourselves, once we learned how to read, was to spend time sitting cross-legged in the aisles of the local Borders bookstore. And one day we discovered a book that would change our lives forever, To Ride a Silver Broomstick. We were 7. That was the day we discovered both chapter books and our religion. Many years have passed, years of rituals under the full moon, and communing happily with nature, and I had yet to spend a single Samhain on a farm. This is the perfect setting in which to celebrate the harvest season and all that it symbolizes. As I dance around the fire tonight at yet another ritual, I will think about the farm animals, especially the sheep Annie and Greta who have passed away, and the dogs that I am training. I will think about the children that I worked with and perhaps wonder what their lives bring now, the oldest of which are now beginning puberty. I will wish them and their parents and teachers luck in this new endeavor and feel grateful that I am not there to deal with that. I will think about the transitions that I have made recently and the ones I am about to embark upon. Perhaps I will eat some delicious and freshly harvested vegetables from the farm. I will feel gratitude for my loved ones, both living and dead, and for my life. I will remember, as we do on the farm, to observe and marvel at the colorful leaves before they fall. Blessed be. Here come your sorrows, all your old regrets, every broken promise and every unpaid debt. Perched on your shoulder, yearning toward the flame, pour them a glass of whiskey and greet them all by name. Build up the bonfires, now the seasons turn. Welcome in another year and let the old one burn. Build up the bonfires, now the seasons turn. Welcome in another year and let the old one burn. Zoe Mulford, singer-songwriter. Although dropping my entire life to move to a farm in rural North Carolina was a bit of an impulsive decision, made when I just wanted to run away from my problems, ultimately it did help me and contributed to my recovery in many ways. I was able to slow down and develop a healthier pace of life, one that was not purely focused on productivity or success as it had been before, but also took into account my emotional, spiritual, and physical needs. Eating healthy, organic meals and exercising all day, every day, got me into better physical shape than I had ever been before, which in turn helped my mental health. I found a local pagan coven and started practicing again after years of just not being able to find the time in my busy life. I also finally achieved my goal of becoming a certified soul collage facilitator, which is a form of therapeutic collage making. I led soul collage workshops every week for the other residents of the farm, which in addition to my work with the animals gave me a meaningful sense of purpose and made me feel like I had something valuable to contribute to the world. Although 6 months later, when I returned to Boston in the middle of January, the transition would prove to be very difficult and I would experience reverse culture shock. Not only was it difficult to move back to New England in the middle of a harsh winter after I had spent 6 months in the South where it rarely snows, but it was difficult to become readjusted to urban life. I can recall even becoming confused with crossing the street, because no streets in rural North Carolina are as busy as Massachusetts Avenue. So there was no need in rural North Carolina for crosswalks or needing to push a button and wait for the light to change before crossing. Drivers angrily honked at me many times as I walked across the street when I wasn't supposed to. In April of 2012, at the age of 26, and 8 years after I initially started college, I once again attempted to return to Lesley University. I began with a course on a topic I was passionate about, the Reggio Emilia method of early childhood education, and I did well in that course. I continued to take a few more courses in the following summer and fall, and had the hope that this time I would finally be able to finish my bachelor's degree. Unfortunately, though, the universe had other plans for me. It all began with what I thought was a simple stomach flu, perhaps due to something I had eaten that didn't agree with me. I was familiar with stomach flus, and so I knew what to do and was not especially concerned. I asked my roommate if she could run to the store and grab some Pepto-Bismol, crackers, ginger ale, and soup. I planned to spend the next few days resting and recovering. Little did I know, my life was about to drastically change. 2 weeks later, I still was not feeling better. I could still barely walk down the street without feeling nauseous and dizzy. My schoolwork that I had delayed due to my illness was piling up. Doctors didn't seem to know what was wrong with me. Other than that, it certainly was not just a stomach flu, since those normally don't last longer than 48 hours. Reluctantly, I withdrew from school, packed up my things, and moved into my parents' house. I didn't want to burden my roommates with needing to drop their own lives and responsibilities to take care of me and take me to the hospital every day. The next few months were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments. Now, not only could I not hold any food down, I was still living off of crackers and chicken broth, but I couldn't sleep, couldn't walk, and was depressed. My parents drove me all over the state of Rhode Island, and also even to Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut on occasion, trying to find an answer. ER visits, gastroenterologists, my childhood psychiatrist and therapist, my mother's primary care physician, a hippie doctor named Happy who told me that tea would solve all my problems. It did not. A sleep study. I was ultimately diagnosed a year later with gastroparesis, a disease with symptoms similar to a stomach flu, except that it is permanent and doesn't ever go away, and Lyme disease. I was told that I was probably bitten by a tick as a teen, but nobody had thought to check me for Lyme before because its neurological symptoms can actually be very similar to those of bipolar disorder. I will now never know how much of my mental health difficulties were actually due to the bipolar or if they were due to the Lyme disease, or if I needed to be on all the psychotropic medications I've been prescribed over the years if the Lyme disease had been discovered sooner. I guess in the end it doesn't matter, since I can't turn back time. The Lyme disease in combination with being weak from not eating and lack of sleep made it difficult for me to walk. I was prescribed a litany of anti-nausea medications and antibiotics have a side effect of nausea, so I needed to be on even more anti-nausea meds, some of which had to be taken every hour and a half. None of it really helped, though, beyond allowing me to add mashed potatoes and plain chicken to my diet. I was still nauseous, dizzy, tired, weak, and in pain. I was also bored, so I read a lot. It helped to pass the time and continue to exercise my mind. I read a YA romance novel called The Fault in Our Stars, about two teenagers with cancer who fall in love. It has since been made into a hit movie. It's not as depressing as it sounds. It focuses mostly on the personalities of the lead characters, their teenage lives, their romance. The cancer does not define them or their stories. But needless to say, I could relate very much to the main character, Hazel, and it was refreshing to read about people like me who are sick, who spend most of their lives in doctors' offices, but who are still able to have identities and relationships beyond their illness and live meaningful, purposeful lives. Quote, I am in love with you, and I'm not in the business of denying myself the simple pleasure of saying true things. I am in love with you, and I know that love is just a shout into the void, and that oblivion is inevitable, and that we're all doomed, and that there will come a day when all our labor has been returned to dust, and I know the sun will swallow the only earth that we ever have. And I am in love with you. Quote from The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. 1 year later, suburban Rhode Island. My walking has improved somewhat. I have started going on daily walks with my mother around our block or around the pond near the local high school. We sit down to rest often, but I am glad and grateful to be up and walking again. Walking past couples walking their dogs, young women in tracksuits jogging, parents with their young children throwing bread at the geese, I feel part of the world again. Nobody here knows that I'm sick. Nobody here knows that I don't have a job. Here, I am just one of them, living a life. We've been talking about the Disney Channel. Mom and I watch it together because it's one of the few things that we can agree upon. Well, that and HGTV. My mother doesn't like to think about sad things or serious things. She prefers to distract herself with something light and funny, try to cheer herself up when she's down. I, however, am the total opposite. I'm always thinking, always over analyzing everything, wondering about things, often to my detriment because it causes me anxiety and makes it difficult for me to fall asleep at night. Sometimes, though, I think it is necessary to find meaning. Mom, I ask. Yes, honey? How do you think people think of me? I think they think you are kind, smart. Sometimes you ask too many questions. But remember what I told you when you were younger. You don't need to worry about what others think of you. All that really matters is what you think of yourself. No, I say. I don't think you understand. I mean, how do you think people will remember me? My mother stops walking abruptly and stares at me. Her brow furrows. You're 28 years old. You don't need to think about that right now. But Mom, I look back at her. I look in her eyes. I try to make her understand. If I can't with my words, maybe she'll understand my face. I notice her eyes begin to water. Nicole, she says firmly. I know she's serious when she uses my given name, instead of the name that I go by, Nikki. We are not talking about this right now. But when will we talk about it, I ask. Tomorrow? We need to... I see my mother's pace quickening. This is a useless effort. I change the subject and ask her what she thought of the latest episode of Girl Meets World on the Disney Channel. I continued to visit my old apartment in Boston whenever I could, when I felt well enough for it. I only had a few friends in Rhode Island, most were in Boston, and spending most of my time with my parents was getting old. I visited during the week of the Gay Pride Parade in June 2014. My daily walks with my mom had been slowly building up my stamina, and I was able to march in the parade with True Colors Out Youth Theater, just like I used to do. I packed my crackers, granola bars, and medications in my purse, and threw on a rainbow feather boa and glitter fairy wings. Pride is our Christmas. That evening, I went to a gay bar, where there was karaoke. I didn't get to sing, but I was able to feel part of the world even more than I had on those walks around the pond. I danced with a short, chubby girl with a nose ring and pink hair, while someone on the stage belted out, I'm coming out. I want the world to know, I'm gonna let it show. She seemed to be a few years younger than me, perhaps in her mid-20s. She wrote her number on a piece of paper, and I put it into my purse. But I never called her. What would be the point? Quote, I'm a grenade, and at some point I'm going to blow up and obliterate everything in my path, and I would like to minimize the casualties, okay? The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. There's nothing like thinking you won't live to 30 to motivate a person. I had so much I wanted to do. I wanted to travel the country. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to do more activism. I wanted to throw a big party where I would introduce all of my friends to each other, so they would have each other for support and wouldn't miss me as much. I wanted to live. That week, the week I was in Boston for the Pride Parade, I began to gather and organize the very last of my things from my old apartment. I wanted to narrow my belongings down to what would fit into 2 suitcases. My barely thought out plan was to spend the next year traveling the country, spending 3 months each in 4 different cities. The first would be Providence, since even though I grew up in Rhode Island and technically still lived there, my parents lived in the suburbs, and I had never truly experienced all the city had to offer. Then I would return to Asheville, North Carolina, an hour outside the farm where I had volunteered 3 years ago. After that, I would go to the West Coast, to San Francisco. In the 4th city, I would decide as I went. I wasn't entirely sure what I would do with myself while I was in these places, but that didn't really matter to me. The point was just to live while I still could. I jumped up and down with excitement when I saw on Craigslist that there was a subsidized studio apartment available for short-term rental in an artist community in Providence, for less than what a single bedroom in a shared apartment in Boston would cost, so I could afford it with my Social Security disability. I wasn't familiar with the neighborhood, and my mother urged me not to walk around alone after dark, but it seemed perfect to me. Ever since I left the dorms of college, I had always dreamed of living in a dorm again, only for adults. And that's basically what this was. Everyone in the converted factory space had their own studio or one-bedroom apartment, but we all shared a courtyard and a giant living room. And unlike every other apartment complex I had ever lived in before, people actually used the common spaces and talked to each other. It being summer, the evenings were warm and filled with guitar playing and barbecues every night in the courtyard. This is also where I tried marijuana for the first time. Needless to say, this would end up being the final stop on my journey. I never would return to Asheville or travel to San Francisco. This shouldn't have come as a surprise to me, but travel is incredibly difficult and logistically complicated when you are chronically ill. I also found myself falling in love with Providence, especially the artist community, where I continued to meet interesting people and make wonderful memories and attempt to become an artist myself. Even though it wasn't what I originally planned, it turned out to be okay in the end. Up until this point, up until thinking that I was dying, most of my life had been focused on living it as joyfully as possible. I didn't think too much about leaving a legacy, since this is not usually on the forefront of the minds of 20-somethings. Of course, abstractly, I knew that life does not last forever. Someday, I would have to worry about that sort of thing. I just thought that it would be a lot further into the future, when I was a little old lady in a rocking chair surrounded by hundreds of cats. Now, though, I did start to think about it. Although I now realize this was not actually true, at the time I felt like I had done nothing with my life and had not contributed anything to the world. So that obviously needed to change, and soon. I enjoyed making art and sharing it with others, but I didn't think I was all that good at it, so I didn't think that was where my legacy would be. Making art was mostly just for myself because I enjoyed it as a hobby. I thought back on the time when I felt I was contributing the most to the world, when I was in True Colors Out Youth Theater advocating for LGBTQ rights. This, in combination with my time in mental health treatment, inspired me to start an online support group for burnt-out activists who are often too focused on changing the world to devote any time to their own needs. This group was meant to address that, so that activists could have healing and renewed energy to return to their activism and do so more effectively. Impulsively, I added some people that I had never met or talked to the group, including some public figures involved in various sorts of activism. One such person was an activist to end discrimination against and marginalization of fat people by the name of Reagan Chastain. I didn't think she was really paying attention. I assumed that public figures were simply too busy to bother with internet groups, but I guess that I was wrong, because she invited me to speak at her Fat Activism conference in 2014. I was to present on a panel of people with disabilities, speaking on the intersection between disability and fatness. I was incredibly nervous, but I was able to answer the questions asked of me without thoroughly freaking out and running away. And I also gave an interactive presentation aiming to use mindfulness and meditation to help people gain empathy for people with disabilities. After the conference was over, I continued to moderate the support group for a short while, but then it became too overwhelming and I needed to stop for the sake of my own mental health. The more people that I added to it, the more conflict there was, and the more different people's needs were at odds with each other. I was given positive feedback about how the group helped people, so I felt a bit guilty at first in giving the project up, but I knew that I couldn't do it justice if I was so stressed out by it. Thankfully, my symptoms of nausea and Lyme disease slowly began to ease over time. I was gradually able to add real food back to my diet and continued to gain strength, both physically and mentally. I no longer felt so defined by being sick and was no longer considered terminal. I moved back to Boston, and when I felt ready to do so, enrolled back in university. This time, I did finish at the age of 32 in 2018, graduating with my bachelor's in child development and being accepted to graduate school at the same university, Lesley University. I am often asked if I wish that I didn't have bipolar disorder, Lyme disease, or gastroparesis. On the one hand, I am incredibly grateful to have found medications to effectively treat these disorders so that the symptoms do not incapacitate me and I am able to function. I do often wonder what my life would have been like if I wasn't bitten by a tick as a teen, or even if the Lyme disease was discovered sooner, so I could have been treated and recovered from it sooner. I am also very grateful that I have had therapy. Although not all of my therapists have been helpful or even humane, some of them most definitely have been. On the other hand, I cannot even imagine not having bipolar. So much of my identity and experience is wrapped up in it. If I was not bipolar, who would I be exactly? I feel like a lot of my positive qualities, such as creativity and wisdom and compassion and empathy, relate to my bipolar disorder. And I'm not saying that people who don't have mental illness can't also be all of those positive things. I'm just saying that if I did not have bipolar disorder, I would in fact not exist at all. Some other person, a non-bipolar person, would be here in my place. Even the Lyme disease and gastroparesis to some extent, even though I don't relate my identity and personality to them in the same way, have been defining for me. I've had Lyme disease for roughly 15 years now, and spent 2.5 of those years focusing all of my time and energy on its treatments. My life, no doubt, would have been completely different without becoming sick. And my life hasn't been perfect, but it hasn't been terrible either. I am okay with how things turned out in the end. And it's hard to even imagine what life had been like if it was different. So, if this is the case, if these diagnoses are such a huge part of my identity and life, what exactly does recovery mean? Does it mean that I shouldn't even try to recover? No, it definitely does not. And I will likely be in recovery in some capacity for the rest of my life. I just gave up a long time ago on the idea that recovery is equivalent to cure. There is no cure for bipolar disorder or for chronic Lyme. And even if there was, it would mean to some extent getting rid of who I am as a person. And I like who I am as a person. It's different for everyone. And I'm not going to say that my experiences and opinions on the matter can speak for another person with the exact same diagnoses who may feel differently about them. But to me, recovery means acceptance. It means accepting myself exactly as I am, illnesses and all. It means accepting that I will continue to learn and grow throughout life, as we all do, and yet at the core, I will always be the same person. It means taking my weaknesses and faults and putting them in different contexts where they become strengths. It means finding the right support system and building a life that brings me joy and that I can be proud of. It means building the capacity for resilience, knowing that no matter how hard I may try, it is impossible to completely avoid adversity or trauma in life. It also means that although I can improve upon myself, and doing so is important for everyone, not everything is my fault. Traumatic events are not my fault. Illness is not my fault. Abuse from toxic people is also not my fault, and it is not your fault either. Societal oppression is not my fault. But that is something that I can and do try to address through my activism. People with mental illness are not the only ones who experience oppression, but members of oppressed groups are often labeled with mental illness for our totally valid response to oppression. I believe strongly that the meaning of life is to leave some kind of positive mark on the world. Everyone's mark is different, and maybe some are small, but that doesn't mean that they are insignificant. If it was within our power to do so, it is also our duty to do what we can to make the world a better place. Quote, to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. That is the meaning of success. Ralph Waldo Emerson.